doing start.
Cool. Amazing. Yeah, I like a good starting thing, but I'm just a measly book seller. I don't really know. Do whatever feels comfortable. I'm gonna let people letting people in. If that's all right with everyone. Amazing. Alrighty. And so the way that it's gonna go down, right while I'm letting people in and they're connecting to audio, is that just so we don't have everyone unmuting themselves at various times and getting a bunch of different audio feedback, is that I'm gonna, when it's your time to speak, you can hit request to unmute yourself and I'll grant the request right now, just so it doesn't get all mushed, because sometimes when there's a bunch of layers, it starts to get a little all over the place. Thank you, everyone, while you're joining. Hello, my name is Ryan. I'm a bookseller here at McNally in the digital world. I know it's kind of like waking up from cryo sleep, so it's a little bit groggy and slow right now, but hi. I'm still admitting people. So thank you all so much for coming. We were just getting some audio stuff worked out. I am very excited to be talking with all these debut short stories PEN America Dau Prize winners. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a little quick talk about McNally and what we're doing. So McNally has some events going on both Zoom and in person, and we did the 2021 PEN America Dau Prize last year. It was amazing. So check on our McNally website to see the future events. And sometimes some of these authors show up, and it'd be fun to see them in person, get a little signing or a drink, or get to talk to them about their work. So look in the future, because there's always new stuff coming up. And there is going to be about like 5 to 10 minutes of a Q&A session at the end of this reading period. So start thinking of your questions now. You can either put them in the chat, or you can direct message them to me if you get a little bit shy. I totally understand. There's like sometimes 100 people in the chat room and you don't want to look silly. So I totally understand. If you would rather just send it to me, I can read it out loud. So without further ado, let me get started. So this anthology celebrates the most recent winners of the PEN/Robert J. Dau Short Story Prize for Emerging Writers, which recognizes 12 writers who have made outstanding fiction debuts in literary magazines, which is an amazing, amazing feat. I just wanted to say congratulations to all the readers and the writers. You deserve this, and I can't wait to hear what's going on and the little bit of work that you're going to be sharing today. Without further ado, I'm going to be introducing this year's judges. So the judges are here today. Two of the judges, one of the judge, Deesha Philyaw, sadly cannot make it today, but we wish her our best, and you can definitely check out her work online. And she was an integral part to this process. So check out her work, and she's with us in spirit. So thank you. But our judges that are here, Sabrina Orah Mark is the author of the poetry collections, The Babies and Tsum Tsum. Wild Milk, her first book of fiction, is recently out from Dorothy, a publishing project. Happily, which began as a monthly column on fairy tales and motherhood in the Paris Review, is forthcoming for Random House in 2023. She has received fellowships from the Creative Capital Foundation and the National Endowments of the Arts, the Sustainable Arts Foundation, and the Fine Arts Work Center, Provincetown, Massachusetts. She lives in Athens, Georgia, and you can read more about her teachings and her writing at sabrinaorahmark.com. Emily Nemens is the author of The Cactus League, which is a New York Times Editor's Choice and was named for one of the best books of 2020 by NPR. Her fiction has appeared in the Iowa Review, the Gettysburg Review, N+1, and elsewhere. Emily spent a decade editing literary quarterlies. Oh my gosh, that's a lot. Including the Paris Review, which won the American Society of Magazine Editors Award for fiction under tenure, and the Southern Review. She teaches at Drew University and is a sports/senior editor for The Stranger's Guide. Read more about her creative, editorial, and educational work at emilynemens.com. So thank you all so much for coming. Thank you, Emily and Sabrina. Oh, amazing. We have our last reader just came in too. Perfect. So I think without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to our first reader, Erin Canal. Let me see. Where are you, Aaron? Right here, asked to unmute. Perfect. Did you get that little? Perfect. Can you see? Right. Perfect. And then I'm going to highlight you right here.
Thanks, Ryan.
Of course.
So I'm just going to be reading from not the very beginning, but almost the very beginning of my story, The Black Kite and the Wind. We were in high school then, drowning in hypotheses. Life itself was an experiment. We were bad. We were Catholic schoolgirl bad. We were impressionable and opinionated and armed with just a sheen of knowledge, like the skin that forms on warmed milk gone cold. We picked fights with our parents. We mocked their luxury cars. We questioned their sincerity of their faith and called out their conspicuous consumption. We skateboarded to school and stashed our boards behind the utility shed. When the final bell rang, we'd ollie down the steps of the chapel, clipping the statue of Mary MacKillop with our boards, every dent or scuff a victory. At home, we smoked joints in plain sight of most of our parents, who either didn't realize or chose to look the other way. We tried all of the drugs we could get our hands on, but eventually settled on pot. Party drugs meant you had to go to a party, or worse, a nightclub, and that just wasn't our thing. We were thinkers, at least we thought we were, and we thought that meant existing in a perpetual state of existential dread, sitting around discussing the dread. We said can't a lot, and even more after we discovered can't, smug with cleverness. Em's older brother was studying philosophy in uni, and that's how we heard about him. We sat around the pool at Em's house, passing the metaphysics of morals around one way, the joint the other way, taking turns to read aloud. We were the privileged, well-bred kids of privileged parents, Queen's castles, CEOs, lawyers, surgeons, magistrates. Dee's dad was a little more complicated. The son of wealth, he'd rebelled against his strict upbringing and started Melbourne's most successful and infamous brothel, the Perfumed Garden, with his inheritance. What had initially been a screw you to his buried parents turned out to be a hugely successful business. He spent his money on race cars, had a helicopter that sat on the lawn by the pool. Every Friday afternoon, he would emerge from the house, cross the lawn and give us a wave before getting in the chopper. The pool surface would ripple as the rotors began to spin. Before long, the noise and wind would be too much, and we would all jump in and watch from beneath the choppy surface. Only Dee would remain above water, waist deep, a middle finger saluting the helicopter as it lifted into the sky, and her dad flew off to the Portsea pub for a beer. Our parents were too important and busy to parent, or they just didn't feel the need to get too involved in our feral teenage lives. So long as our grades were good, and they were, we were free from much intrusion. We were set for success in our high school years. We'd aced the exams. University acceptance was a given. We thought we were invincible. And then we killed a kid, Freddie Green, and got away with it, and proved we were invincible after all. Next up is Yasmin Majid.
Amazing. Yasmin, let me just get you. Oh, here you are, asked to unmute. I feel like it's so, so jointed, but here you are. Yasmin Adel Majid. Can you? Oh, there you are. Perfect.
Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. Hello. That was really beautiful, Aaron. So I'm going to read from the beginning of my story, A Wedding in Multan, 1978. There he was on TV, the new leader defending the plan to hang the old one. He was seated in his garden, wearing his general suit, the color as dark as the palms behind him. Gathered around the TV set with her family, Samia thought the new leader's garden looked just like theirs. From where she sat, her father and mother on the divan, Aisha, her sister, by the window, and Samia on the old cane stool beside them, she could look out at the palms heavy from spring rain, the stone courtyard with its resident stray cats, and the thicket of sickle-leaf eucalyptus that bordered the house. That bulwark of trees was part of the same batch of saplings her father had imported and planted at their family farm in Multan the year she was born. They outgrew her quickly, and now, almost 8 years later, some of the trees caressed the roof of their house, while Samia remained as small as ever. A mouse in the forest, Aisha liked to say, when she spotted her sister alone in the garden. Her sister's teasing was usually lined with reprimand, but Samia liked the role of the mouse, that sneaky, curious creature who moved invisibly through the larger world. On screen, the new leader raised his finger to make a point. I may not have given it anything at all to this country, but certainly I've given one thing, he said. I've given them rule of law. He was a year into the dictatorship. His suit was garnished with silver ornaments that looked like dull trinkets on TV. They were nothing like the jewelry that Aisha wore to parties, earrings that dripped to her shoulders, gold necklaces that shone with a violent glint, glass trudea you could snap into crude weapons with the slightest pressure. Samia was drawn to the baubles that girls wore. She described them in detail in stories she wrote with her best friend Noreen, based on British novels they loved about children in the countryside who solved minor mysteries, local smuggling rings, low-stakes thefts. The specifics of their evils were always vague, but the villains were unsubtle figures, men with shifty eyes and skinny throats pocked with stubble, whose plots were always uncovered thanks to the children's investigations. Noreen was the daughter of one of the farm managers, and during visits to Multan, while Aisha and her mother spent afternoons languorously gossiping on the grounds, and their father shut himself away in his office to catch up on business, Samia and Noreen met in the guava orchard with their notebooks. Thank you. And I'm so excited to introduce Catherine Bai.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. Let me get, yay, Catherine Bai, asked to unmute.
Thank you, Yasmin, for that beautiful reading. I'm going to be reading the first two sections from my piece, Writing with Blood. Huang He. An American girl cannot hold down a conversation in Chinese, the characters wriggling like carp underneath her tongue, spilling out in imperfect dribbles before her lips can capture their bones. This happens when she is sculpting freeform, thoughts leaping off English instincts, reaching for Chinese translations that spill out of fingers like sediment, left behind by diverted currents. But remind her of a poem, 5 characters per line, 4 lines, and blood will rush to her mouth like a river to sea. 白日依山尽，黄河入海流，欲穷千里目，更上一层楼。I've heard that the Huanghe is drying up before it can reach the ocean. Does she know that the Yellow River Basin was the birthplace of ancient Chinese civilization? Farmers are taking and taking irrigation for crops that will ignore its water source and creep toward the sky instead. The American girl allows the carp to wriggle free, plopping onto loose soil that sprays earth onto her ankles. She consumes English like meat and milk, foods that will make her grow big and strong until one day she will reach her hand up to touch the white sun and discover, with surprise, that it burns. She will look beneath her feet for the currents that flow so faithfully to the sea and find only sediment, stained with iron and bleached with sunlight. 9. An old woman, stooped, with bound feet and a cane, is walking, surrounded by a crowd of support, amorphous and clothed in hardy neutrals, hardy fabrics that are prickly warm. She is seated with help from no one in particular, and the crowd dissipates into discreet men with faces that have been sun-baked in a clay oven, dust not so much literal, but implicit in their creases. Their teeth are like my father's. I am here for the first time, standing within unpaved village life, small and with an intuitive understanding that I am an alien to the world my father grew up in. The American girl hides behind her father's belonging and uncurls her toes for running. She doesn't want to know who this woman is, with shoes shaped like the curve of a crustacean's claw. Exoskeletons belie the writhing beneath. The old woman is never introduced to me, and she never takes off her shoes. I imagine the grandmother I never met hiding in those feet. And that's it from me. And now I am pleased to call on Cal Shook, who will be reading next.
Thank you so much, Catherine. All right, next up, Cal. Hey.
Hi, thank you, Catherine. I love that story. It was lovely to hear you read some. I'm going to read the beginning of my story, Man, etc. You schedule, excuse me. You schedule the U-Haul for a weekend when your husband plans to be in the woods. You do not repeat your argument that camping isn't medication or therapy, that it cannot, in other words, fix him. You make him a sandwich for the drive to Mendocino, and as his car pulls away, you know it's the last time you'll see him. Choosing what to pack is much trickier than you thought. You decide against most of the wedding gifts, and while the coffee grinder seems important and the toaster, you don't care. You bring your leather ottoman, but leave the chair. You peel the bedspread from your king-size bed because you love it, and even though your next bed is just a futon in your sister's New York apartment, you toss it in a bag and take it out to the truck. You work steadily, wrapping what's fragile, letting things go, moving room to room like housekeeping at a roadside motel. Once you've rounded up the stuff you want, it's almost dark. You think of your husband among the fir trees, pitching his tent. Then you picture him home again, back from the wild, livid at finding you gone. You lock the front door and slip your house key into the mailbox. You drive most of the night until your U-Haul needs gas. A few hours sleep at a rest stop in southern Wyoming, then a plate of hash browns at a nearby Waffle House, hunched over your coffee, like the cowboys at the counter. You drive on the rest of the day, and the next time you refuel, you're in Nebraska. At the pump across from yours is an oversized blue pickup. There's a lawn chair in the bed and a lady in the chair with her feet propped up on a plastic cooler. Her face is tilted to the sky and her cheeks and bare shoulders are sunburned. She catches you staring and she grins. Then a man comes out of the mini mart and hands her an iced tea before climbing into the driver's seat and starting up the truck. The lady swigs her tea and calls cheers in your direction as the pickup speeds away. It takes you another day and a half, but suddenly you're sitting in Manhattan traffic and turning onto your sister's block in the Lower East Side. You visited once before her carpenter boyfriend moved in, so you recognize the flat fixed tire shop sign on the ground floor of her building. When your sister comes down to let you in, her face is red and wet with tears. For a second, you wonder if you might have it wrong, if you might actually be here for a crisis of hers, not for her to help you out of yours. We're eating hot peppers, she says. It's competitive, she adds, laughing and wiping her eyes. She holds you in a long hug and then carries your duffel up 4 flights of stairs. The carpenter, sweating from the peppers, stands to greet you. He shows you your room, which was formerly half of theirs before someone, likely him, put up a wall to make 2 smaller ones. Your sister has been using it as her studio. Marcel, you ask about the paintings all over the wall? They are portraits of your childhood dog, a French poodle with jet black poofs of hair. In one, he's scaling a rusty fence and has a roguish sneer. In another, he's dressed as Napoleon. Your sister nods and sweeps a playful arm past his incarnations. May he rest in peace, she says. She leaves the room to get bed sheets, returns with a Xanax and big glass of milk, and swears she'll call the police if your husband ever tries to find you here. And now we're going to hear from Sarah and Yuka.
Yay. Thank you so much. And thank you. I wanted to mention Sarah and Yuka. Thank you for editing this wonderful anthology of these prize winners. I'm going to add you both to the pin right now. Alrighty, add pin. And I'll start. Perfect.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. Is
Hi.
my voice echoing out of Yuka's speakers?
Maybe I should mute.
I think you're up first.
Perfect.
If you want to start the thank yous, Yuka.
Yep, let me unmute again.
Oh, we have to ask you every time.
Yeah, sorry. Unless maybe I can make you a
You're
co-host.
so powerful, Ryan.
I know, this is terrible. I hate this kind of Yuka, can you hear me? It feels
Maybe
like
we should just leave them on then if it's going to be. I'll just stop talking.
all right, Yuka.
Hi. Hi, everybody. I'm Yuka Igarashi, and with Sarah Lynn Rogers, I'm co-editor of the Best Debut Short Stories series. Thank you all for being here, and congratulations again to this year's winners. It's such an honor to get to publish your writing at this very exciting stage in your writing lives. One of the great things about this prize is having a view of the work being published in literary journals. And we're so pleased that this year's anthology includes work from the Asian American Literary Review, Barrel House, Bomb, the Cincinnati Review, Flock, Hobart, Plowshares, Reckoning, Type House, Virginia Quarterly Review, and the White Review. So thank you to the editors and everyone else at these magazines.
Another wonderful thing about the prize is to be able to get to know the judges through reading these stories. So thank you very much to Sabrina Orah Mark, Emily Nemens, and Deesha Philyaw for your careful, inspired choices and for your valuable time and attention.
We also want to thank everyone at PEN America, especially Danica Bettinen, for running the prize and for collaborating with us every year. And thank you also to Ryan and everyone at McNally Jackson for hosting us tonight.
Yay, wonderful. Oh, you're muted again. This is, I feel like it's like a summoning. We're like in a seance. This is really,
You know,
here, Sarah.
thank you. And of course, we wanted to offer a really grateful thank you to Fernanda Dau Fisher and the family of Robert J. Dau, whose idea it was to create a prize for emerging writers who have so generously supported the prize since 2017. Thank you, Fernanda, and thank you to the Robert Jensen Dau Foundation. Okay, we're truly done now, Ryan. Thank you for letting us thank everyone.
Oh, of course, that was beautiful. And thank you guys again. I can't state it enough. Editors are the backbone of this sort of thing. So thank you both so much for editing this wonderful, wonderful thing. Let's see. Sarah, are you supposed to introduce the next one, or should I could just go right to Preeti? Perfect. Yeah, no worries. I'm gonna go right to it. All right, next one is Preeti Vangani. Where can I find you? Right here, up there, and ask to unmute. There you are. Oh, now a few words from Fernanda. Okay, sorry, I got all mixed up. All right, so we're gonna go Fernanda. This is perfect. Hi, Fernanda. Ask to unmute again. This feels like I have too much power. Perfect. Can you hear me, Fernanda?
Am I unmuted?
You're all good.
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Well, listen, I am, as on behalf of the Robert Jensen Dau Foundation, in memory of my father, I want to thank everybody for coming today to hear these wonderful writers and to experience the amazingness of, I don't know, that sounds kind of hokey, but the amazingness of young writers who are experiencing success perhaps for the first time. Just a little bit about our family. My father was born in a small town in northern Michigan, which had a connection to Ernest Hemingway. My grandmother was a contemporary of Hemingway's, knew Hemingway, and because of that, my father decided in his later life when he was ill that he wanted to be able to take and create a prize that would perhaps search for the next Ernest Hemingway. And then he looked at me and he said, all right, Fernanda, you figure it out. I don't know anything about writing, so go ahead. And that's how I ended up with the PEN Foundation, and we created the PEN Dau Short Story Prize, which is how we refer to it at home. It is beyond exciting to be able to help to recognize and give a start to men and women who are starting out their careers in writing. And I want to just say that there are a number of alums that are on the call today, on the Zoom today, and it's really amazing to have them here as well. And as I said privately to the group earlier, it is not out of the realm of possibility that one of this year's recipients will, within the next couple of years, be publishing their first novel, if that is what they choose to do. So on behalf of our family, we are, yes, Doug Henderson saying no joke, because he is one of the people who has had a novel published. So it's tremendously, tremendously wonderful. And I know my father is so proud of all of you and appreciative of everything that the PEN has done, that Yuka and Catapult have done. Obviously, I thank Ryan, I thank the bookseller for all of you all that what's going on. And I really just, oh my gosh, I just want to stop talking and hear more reading. So read away. And thank you very much for joining us today.
No, thank you, Fernanda. And that was such an interesting story. I love that. And you did a great job of organizing this whole thing. So thank you. All righty. Next up is Preeti. Let me ask to unmute you. Right, quick. Divangani. Hello. Mute.
Right, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for being here, and thank you so much for everyone who brought this collection to life. I'll read a little further along from my story, Work Wives. And the only thing to know is that the main character recently lost her mother and has joined her first workplace, where she meets Rads, who very quickly becomes her closest work friend or her work wife, and is having a secret affair with somebody in the office, a boy named Ankur. The kind of Hindi that Rads and Ankur speak is of a slightly higher dialect, and the word hum that appears in dialogue, when they say it, it could mean I as well as B. So that gets referenced in the story. Rads was beautiful, much more beautiful than me, except she suffered from epiphora, a condition in which her eye held and stored excessive fluid in her tear duct, blurring her vision. When simpler remedies like eye drops or a warm compress didn't work, she had to be taken to the hospital so the doctor could drain her eye out. Often on Friday nights, when we returned from the club, drunk and tired, before turning into Ankur's house, which was 2 flats down from Radz's, I would help her with one last round of eye drops. Hold the bottle to her eye, her gaze flittering, as if she were entering another world. It reminded me of the last time I'd seen Mummy alive before she'd become comatose, already a lot gone. Chemotherapy had stolen most of her cognition. She was half her size, eyes shuttling like ping pong balls between wall and ceiling. Waiting by her bed, when my dad was not in sight, I would make clapping motions in front of her face, as if I was swatting flies to get her attention, hoping my clapping might jolt the tiniest sliver of her memory back. I mimed clapping, slow then fast, than the speed at which she did when she saw me on stage in school. Very quietly though, I didn't want any audience to my desperation. Can you tell me who I am? I asked my mother. Tell me, who am I? Come on. I clapped and I clapped. Hame kabhi koi nahi milega, Rad said to me, waiting for the eye drop to take. Crying through her disorder and her sadness, we won't ever find a guy. I dug my nose into her hair, lying next to her, imitating her voice, her honey-coated Hindi. Hame koi bhi ladka mil sakta hai. We can get any guy we want. You know you're far prettier than me, right? And I would start crying too. It was easy for me to cry. All I had to think of was the way Mummy said the word independent, her one wish for me to be. Or the way my father cursed when Mum and I returned home later than his curfew. Or to remember the monsoon night, Mum and I were stuck on the bus returning home from Masi's in a pre-cell phone era, relishing our double-decker toasted cheese sandwiches, the bus moving inch by inch through overflowing gutters, not fretting about the umbrellas we didn't carry, our mouths baptized by full-fat cheese, the two of us suspended in a delay that was out of our hands, in the hands of the rain that forced within us a slowdown, against which even my father's anger would come unfounded. It was something else. To be stuck on a road with my mother, to feel free and protected at once, a feeling I rarely felt with Dad, one I could conjure but only experience in fragments, if ever. I really miss her, you know. I wish it was him who had died. I told Radhika, my grip loose around her waist like a dew on a drooping petal. The vileness of my wish became clear as I spoke, and it made me cry even louder. I had done it once again, invited my dead mother into a room to outrun someone else's sadness. I did this often, even with Dad, even with Ankur. Don't start with your self-pity again, he would say. What else could I do, though, to hide my powerlessness? Thank you so much. And I'm so excited to invite Emma Shannon to read next.
Hi. So I'll also be reading a section from the middle of my story, beat by beat. And for context, the story is about an all-creating worm at the edge of the universe and its friendship with a little boy named Edwin. Sunlight is the worm's first creation, born from the tan heart's beat. The sun itself is formed far later from its stardust shit. As a baby, Edwin lies in his crib, a single beam of light beating down on his belly from a crack in the curtain. It is warm, and he dreams of a planet where plants are grown of lava and fire seems cool to the touch. On the other side of the world, a 46-year-old man has an idea that could potentially end global warming. The worm swallows it whole. Edwin does not always understand what compels the worm to tell him certain secrets. The worm speaks of forgotten birthdays of people he will never meet, and of the perpetrators of crimes centuries before he has even a thought in his parents' minds for the worm to gobble up. He thinks that sometimes the worm just likes to hear itself think, for the worm never speaks aloud. Even the whispers are something intangible, inaudible, bits of information that Edwin knows to be true, though he cannot articulate where this knowledge comes from. He knows that on the 1st of June, 2061, the Earth will be consumed by a creature not as large as the worm, but far larger than what humans have come to know. The creature resembles an armadillo with sapphire scales. On the 4th of July, 2020, Edwin, age 8, sits on the roof of his next-door neighbor's garage watching the fireworks. He sits next to Armand Sarkisian, a 5th grader 2 years older than himself. The worm does not like the way Armand's ideas taste, as though they are coated in expired cheese dust from a bag of Cheetos asteroids discontinued in 2004. Edwin tells this to Armand, who promptly pushes him off the roof. Edwin wakes up in Providence Medical Center with a concussion and a broken arm. He can no longer see the worm. He can no longer hear it whisper. He begins to think it was just an imaginary friend. The worm is again alone at the edge of the universe. The worm is always alone, and it is never alone. It exists at all times at once, always able to know when Edwin could see it, always aware that this knowing would not last. The teal heart misses a beat. On the 19th of April, 2012, at 6:54 a.m., Edwin is born. 2 hours and 3 time zones away in Montreal, Canada, a Siberian squill flower, Scilla siberica, blooms to signify spring. The worm gets nervous and the red heart beats too fast, instilling the flower with the knowledge that Rome was never meant to exist. It has not yet figured out how these two events are related, but continues to insist that somehow they are. From the age of 7 to the age of 15, Edwin finds comfort in both his therapist and the glow-in-the-dark constellations stuck onto his popcorn ceiling. He stares at the plastic stars each night before falling asleep, wondering just how large our universe is and whether we really exist at all. He theorizes that there must be other civilizations and worlds among ours, undetectable and microscopic. After the roof incident with Armand, he forgets that in the scope of things and to beings like the worm, he is a microscopic organism too. The glow of the stars is pale green. A 9-year-old boy in Gold Coast, Australia, stares at the same stars on his own ceiling, arranged exactly the same way as Edwin's. The two will never know this about each other. They will never even meet. And next up, I'd like to introduce Seth Wang.
Thank you so much. I've been looking in the chat and I also will never forget the worm. Thank you so much. Let me find Seth real quick. Perfect. Hi, Seth. Asked to unmute and Kenya right here.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Emma, for that gorgeous reading. And yeah, this is from the beginning, so you don't have to know anything. There's a secret buried in this letter. What I'm about to tell you isn't it. I'm deathly allergic to ugliness. I have been since I was a boy. And by the time you read this affliction, which has so exquisitely disfigured my life, will at last have finished me. None of this is metaphor, by the way. I'm not some fairy queen tragedienne playing psychosexual charades. When I say allergic, I mean it literally, symptomatically. And by ugliness, I refer to an umbrella term of potential allergens, including but not limited to ugly people and their ugly things, triteness, tackiness, the banal, the cliche, kish, but not camp, failed minimalism, failed maximalism, bad taste, bad manners, bad art, and infinite other vehicles of aesthetic distress. Ugliness of the milder variety induces ostrich leather hives, iambically throbbing headaches, a lavish swelling of the tongue. Moderate ugliness brings on blue lips and audio-visual hallucinations, themselves too hideous to describe. In the presence of moderate to severe ugliness, I, like a much-pawed statue of the Madonna, weep tears of blood. And in the severest cases, this weeping turns to sweating. to the point of fatal exsanguination even, should the ugliness not be removed. You'll notice I've provided no examples of ugliness. This isn't me being coy. My hypersensitivity, you see, is so acute that to even speak of ugliness, to even entertain its notion, could potentially trigger symptoms. With the exception of the rare crumb of ugliness that I consider necessary to my secret, and which you'll know by the occasional annotative bloodstain, I'll leave things up to your no doubt talented imagination. But what about specialists, you cry, outraged? Well, they're no help at all. And I've seen quite a few in my time. Between the ages of 5, it forces you into precocity, this affliction, and 16, my life was picked bone clean by a veritable danse macabre of white coats. Nowadays, the only men who attempt any diagnoses at all are the snooty philosopher fops, erasable mustaches, Byronic forelocks, aspirationally ironic tweed, with whom I'm occasionally set up by well-meaning but imbecilic friends of friends. I tend to read, for some reason, as homosexual. Ennui, they overpronounce. Weltschmerz, acedia, dipshit, prick. Meanwhile, the women in my life call me, when they call me, more accurate epithets like hopeless romantic. Having since become somewhat of a specialist myself, it's impossible not to with this affliction. My expert opinion is it's a cross between synesthesia and that extreme form of sun poisoning that forces children to live like vampires, but with the slimming effects and sex appeal, a little red flourish of consumption. Small comforts for a dying man. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, thank you. That was so clever. Echoing everyone in the chat. All righty. So I think now is a good time as any to open it up to the questions for the Q&A part. If anyone has any sort of questions, then we can put it on in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand and ask to be unmuted, we can also have that as well. So any questions for the authors, the editors, the judges? Let's see. Oh, Fernanda? Here, I can ask to unmute you. There you go.
Yeah, my question would be to all of you, what was your inspiration for writing the stories? Because they're all phenomenal and they're all so interesting. So any of you, what was your inspiration for writing your story? And
I just made it so y'all can unmute yourselves at will to use this question and answer section easier. So if you have, anyone can go first. Whoever.
I can go first. My story is based on real historical events. So there was a real massacre that happened in Multan in 1978. And I was doing research on this period of time in Pakistani history, and I was interested in writing about it. I also wrote the story kind of during the last days of the Trump administration and was thinking a lot about complicity in state power and violence. And that's what brought me to the story.
All right. Yay. And I think actually we're gonna try to move it on to, I'm gonna keep a pin in that, Fernanda, but I also would love to hear in the schedule, it says to talk to the readers, they're going to ask some questions of the judges as well. So while the readers are thinking of their answers for your amazing question, I would also love if anyone has any questions to grill the judges now, or interesting questions about to ask to the judges. You can speak now. Oh, yes, definitely.
This is for both judges. Has spite ever been a motivator for your writing? And if so, who are you spiting?
Oh, wow. That's Emily, you want to go first?
That's a great question and a hard one.
I mean, candidly, when I started writing about sports, I got like a lot of eye rolls, and I was often the only woman in the room when I was like, or not the only, but one of few women in the room when I was covering LSU football in the 2012 season. And so it wasn't quite spite, but I certainly wanted to write about this specialized subject in a way that would hold up to a community of writers that hadn't necessarily made a lot of space for women historically, that would pass muster with people who didn't necessarily expect that I'd be able to write convincingly, compellingly about sports. But I also wanted to make it literary, so I had sort of my home base of literary fiction, but learning the expertise and the language of this sort of subculture, and wanting to do it well. So there was a certain amount, I don't know if spite is exactly the word I would choose for it, but it was a cousin emotion, maybe.
I love that as spite being a cousin emotion. I think with spite, there's that kind of like fiery, like sense of I have a lot of problems with you people, like that feeling, that gets stirred up. But I think that there's for me, I think with my writing, it's so much about, articulating these silences. And so the silences, and I kind of connect like that spite feeling to feeling like you can't speak, So sometimes those silences are these immediate silences, but sometimes there are these like really, really old silences that I've kind of like dragged along with me for what seems like forever, and they kind of turn and become their own, kind of beautiful creatures that I can then give a kind of body to. So I kind of imagine it as like, not so much like an act of anger or erasure, but like this kind of place where you can create. Yeah.
I think if I can piggyback on that answer and maybe posit another question, deep emotion, whether it's spite or something else, certainly inspires a lot of writing. And like Preti, with your story, I felt like it went between desire and grief, like Work Wives has, I don't know if that was the inciting incident, was wanting to write about this really complex emotional stew, but as a reader, I certainly felt that. So I wonder if you might want to speak about sort of the emotional core of your story, and if anyone else is really, moved by big feels, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love those responses. My story is fairly autobiographical. I lost my mother when I was very young. And the year that my mother passed away roughly coincided with me coming into my sexual being. And in some senses, I've always viewed pleasure through the lens of ungrief. And so they're always like fighting for space or sitting in like a scale balance. And I think like if I go deeper into that, I feel that in my family especially, but also a little bit, I can say in my culture, there was a huge amount of non-confrontation when it came to like talking or sitting down about grief. My mother grew up in a family of 12 siblings, and till date, 14 years after her passing, I've never been able to have an open conversation with any of her brothers or sisters about her passing. So there is a kind of veil in the room every time we try to sit down and talk about grief. And I've been thinking a lot about what early grief looks like, and it often like hardens into this rock of anger, and how it manifests in different fields of life as we're lugging the gone along in our hearts. So I think that's why pleasure is so sporadically and deeply tainted with this idea of rage.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the editors? Oh, yeah, Catherine.
Yes, I have two questions, one question for each of our wonderful judges. So for Emily, I wanted to ask, how did you balance being an editor and a writer, and how did you ensure that you had enough creative energy left for your writing at the end of the day, or whenever you had time for writing? And for Sabrina, an equally practical question. I wanted to ask about your column and how what writing on deadline has taught you that you now apply to the writing you do for yourself and for your primary art.
That's a great question. It's a hard one, and it changed all the time. When I was editing the Southern Review, I was able to sort of structure my week where I was 4 days a week working really hard at the magazine, like at my desk at 7, getting home at 6, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I wrote the majority of the Cactus League. And when I got to New York and was editing the Paris Review, it was a little bit more unpredictable, just in terms of what my work week looked like, and it was just a longer work week to run that magazine, and so I did not see my friends enough. I did not have brunch, I think, for an entire year. Like if I had a weekend day, I just like sat at my desk and wrote. Wasn't entirely sustainable, but I got the work done, and when I wasn't at my desk, I was thinking about work. So I think this is, so many of us have many obligations in our life, and creative practice is one of them. And so I think recognizing and building systems and schedules that you can write, but also sort of building a practice where even if I'm not at my desk producing new pages, there's ways to think about the manuscript, and invoke the idea, come up with solutions while I'm walking my dog, or reading things on my commute that might inform my writing the next time I'm able to sit down and have a meaningful session. I came up with a whole lot of hacks that made it feel like I could sort of support the magazine and do the work that was on deadline, but keep my practice moving forward. Over to you, Sabrina.
Yeah, I feel that the kind of moving around, like always as a writer, being like, I'll take that, that's coming along with me, that piece of language, that image, for the column completely changed so much for me in so many different ways. I had written an essay that appeared in the Paris Review, and Nadja Spiegelman was the online editor at the time there, and she asked me if I would want to do a column, and I thought, and at first she asked if I would want to do it either weekly, which I knew I wouldn't be able to do, or monthly. And so I knew there was no way I could write an essay every month. So I said yes. I was like, and so the sort of like terror and shame are great motivating factors, I think. And just working monthly, I mean, with Nadja Spiegelman, who is just an absolute, she's gold. She's just absolute gold. But there was something about like writing monthly, like writing with the moon, like that I knew I had to have like a beginning and middle and ends like through the month. It was very strange. And so in like the beginning of the month, I would start panicking, and then I would call my friend Amy and tell her there is no way that I can do this. And then halfway through the month, there would be, just like a big mess of pages. And then, and so it would, and then ultimately, I remember my friend Amy saying to me that I was going to like pull all the crones out of menopause, that just like start this just gigantic new menstrual cycle of monthly writing. But anyway, I think, but my real answer is that I knew there was no way I could do it so I just said yes. And I encourage that for myself, like constantly to just, like push past what I think I'm capable of. Because I think we're the ones who get in our own way often.
Thank you so much, Emily and Sabrina.
I have a question that might be some close to that, because I know that both of you write poetry and fiction and essays. And I'm just wondering if you could talk about your experience of kind of moving through all of those things.
I think Sabrina should take this one, because I have written poetry, but it's a pretty dusty corner for me. So I've been mostly focused on prose for several years now. So Sabrina, I'd love to hear how you balance all those.
Yeah. When I very much am first a poet, no matter what. Even if I'm writing an essay, I'm a poet, or if I'm writing a story, I feel like I'm writing as a poet somehow. I mean, for me, what happened was the difference with time, where I would write. When I started as a poet, I would kind of have to begin a poem and finish it almost in one sitting. Like I needed it to be some kind of hermetically sealed box, and they kind of became these boxes. And then after I had kids, I just couldn't I had to get up from my desk. And so there are all of these interruptions, and I've written about this before, but it still really holds true, where because I kept coming back to pieces of writing, it was almost as if there were like these little tears, and I would add something, and there was more breath, and there was more space, and it was more, they just got longer and longer, and they kind of refused that like sealed suffocation feel. And I think like it's really good, I teach writing, and I always like encourage, I always invite like experimenting with genres, where like, if you feel most comfortable in prose, like just write a poem and see what the poem can teach you about writing the story, and what can the story teach you, what can writing the story teach you about writing the essay. And I remember, I mean, at one point with my poetry, I was like, wait, I can put dialogue in a poem. I didn't know I was allowed to do that. Like I can use things that are supposed to be only for prose inside of a poem. And that, I mean, it seems so simple, but it changed everything, allowing for that kind of like, it felt transgressive and really freeing. And I suddenly felt like I could say things that I hadn't before been able to say. So I kind of love that collision of genre. But usually like I'm like working on poems, or I'm working on stories, or I'm working on essays. It's hard for me to move. Now I am moving between stories and essays more, but yeah, not as fluidly as I'd like.
Thank you, Sabrina.
All right, let's go back to Fernanda's question. Now we can pull the spotlight back onto the authors. For the prize winners, I mean, if you could start to think of your kernels of ideas. I believe Fernanda talked about like where it all started, where this idea of this particular story started. If I'm not wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, Fernanda.
Nope, you're correct. And quite honestly, if you don't offer, we might just call on you and put you on the spot. So you might as well just, have the courage. This is a safe space here. You did write these, and just like musicians, you know, you wonder about why they write their songs the way they do. Are they writing about a loved one? Is it a girlfriend? Is it a spurned lover or something like that? We want to know about your stories. So Britti, you talked a bit about your story, but you know, it would be interesting to hear from the rest of you more about yours. And you don't have to tell anything that's going to be, you know, too personal, but it would be interesting to hear from you. So please don't be shy and just unmute yourself and tell us just a little bit.
I can go if you want.
Sure.
There aren't many stories that I've written that I have a very distinct memory of when I started writing it and why, but this one I can tell you. So I was in my MFA program in Paris and we workshopping a different story, and the other story had a sort of an issue in it, that there was a sort of a backstory that needed to be written for a character who had a sort of a dark secret. So this story that you see in the book was supposed to be a fix for another story, but it quickly became its own story. So it was started in 2019 in January in Paris on a rainy day, but Australia was on fire at the time, and everyone kept talking to me about Australia being on fire because it was a really bad fire season. So fire was on the mind. So it was just a sort of weird, birth of a story that was sort of supposed to be something else. It was supposed to be about a boy, and it quickly became obvious that it was girls. And I always wanted to sort of dabble in the first person plural. So I wanted to write it in a sort of collective perspective. So that's how my story was born.
All right.
I wonder. Oh, cool.
Good. Actually, Fernanda direct messaged me to say, why don't you go next? So I'll go next. So I think my story actually really surprised me what came out, because this is the first time that I've ever really experimented with form and brought, Chinese into it. And I also up until I wrote this story, a lot of what I was writing in my workshops and in high school and college was just, facsimiles of what I had been reading. Up until that point, I didn't read Asian American literature until I was 19 or 20 years old. And when I finally started reading it, it really changed everything. And around this time, when I was writing this story, I was thinking a lot about literacy and family and the primacy of English, and how English sort of invaded my psyche, and sort of all this signaling around success and what makes for a universal or successful story. Typically universal is code for white, and that's something that I internalized without really being conscious of that. And so, when I was thinking about what I chose to lose in order to assimilate and be successful and be universal, and that choice, even though it was unconscious, it was a choice nonetheless. And so so all these things sort of coalesced, and I realized how wrong I had gotten it all. And so I think it was really fitting that this story, which is the first time that I've ever put anything Chinese or any part of my family life into, is also the first time that I experimented with form. And having these sections and sort of having this more experimental, fragmented form. I keep saying form, but yeah, that's sort of very messy origin story. I wasn't really thinking when I was starting to write this piece. And I think honestly, it might have started in a workshop or in a class assignment, but it just sort of turned into this thing. And I'm really grateful that this was the piece that made it out into the world, because I think if, the other pieces that I've been writing, it was clear that my heart wasn't in it. And everything just sort of came together for this one, with reading my changes in my reading habits and what I was consuming. And of course, what I consumed was gonna come out in my writing. So yeah. That's me.
I love that.
Nice. Fernanda has messaged me that I'm next. So I was in my advanced fiction workshop at undergrad at Johns Hopkins, and I'd been trying for days to write my like final fiction piece for this course. I'd had like 8 false starts with other stories. It was due in like 3 days. I'd given up. I'd gone to see some friends. I was walking home in the middle of the night, and the line "at the edge of the universe, there is a worm, pale pink and glowing" popped into my head, and I went, okay, sure. That makes as much sense as anything else. And so when I got back home, I just sort of kept going and went from there. And while I didn't have an initial idea for where the story was going, a lot of the elements of the story are drawn from little details in my life. Like my dad goes on fishing trips to Montana a lot of the time. He's fished on the Flathead River. We used to fish together when I was a kid. We just haven't recently because we live on opposite sides of the country now. Or I've been volunteering at the aquarium in Baltimore for years. So that leads to some of the stuff like the Aquarium of the Pacific being referenced, or the screaming pia. That's one of the birds we have in our rainforest exhibit. Just a bunch of little details coalescing and being pulled out of my life and then reformatted into Edwin's. And just sort of the way I've been viewing life in different directions, or like thinking about going to my friend's bat mitzvah when I was a kid and what that was like. And it quickly became a story about connection and almost like just how connections, there's no reason for any of it. There's no reason for me to put any of these words on the page, but because I am doing it, that is what's giving meaning to it. And I just decided to run with that.
Don't be shy. If you haven't spoken yet.
Fernanda's
Seth?
coming for you. Seth, let's hear it.
Come on, Seth.
All right, well, I don't know if you want to hear this because I could talk for a really long time, but okay, I'll try to give you the condensed version.
USA Today version. USA Today version.
I haven't read USA Today forever. Okay, anyway, see, now you've got me off track. All right, so most of the creative decisions that went into this piece began with just issues of space, like literal actual word count space, okay? Like I had 5,000 words to write, and I had 4 weeks to do it. Halfway through, I wrote this really bad dark academia satire that was just complete garbage. Okay, it was like this 40-something-year-old guy, he like infiltrates this like clique that was clearly a ripoff of the Secret History guys, but it was like but they were decadent instead of like ancient Greek. And they were going to serve the head of their advisor on a platter, like a la Salome. And it was just really bad. It was like aesthetically worthless. And so I was like, I can't, this is not good. And, you know, I had 2 weeks left at this point. So I thought, hey, like, what's a good way to condense? Also, it was like really novelistically paced. So I was like, what's a good way to condense it? Oh, I know, a suicide note. Suicide notes are like my favorite form. One of the reasons being that you can absolutely condense like an entire novel, an entire life story into this form. And so, yeah.
Wow.
Condense a whole life story into a suicide note, like perfect.
I love that.
I love it.
Yeah, Seth, that should be quoted. You should keep that in your, whenever I have the Seth Wang quotes. Suicide note is my favorite form.
Well, it's in the the 2 interviews that are coming out.
Oh my God.
Several of us. So keep an eye out, guys.
Promote it. That's amazing.
Burnett, the reasons well, besides just being a chicken, the reason I didn't just jump in at the beginning when you asked the question was that I was looking for something that I loved in the introduction. I love the introduction, Yuka and Sarah. Just thank you so much for that. It was like really special to read that and your take on all of these stories that Emily and Sabrina had chosen. But there's something great here that says, given the pain and loss of the past several years in particular, it's easy to see the appeal of fiction about infinite chances or alternate universes, particularly ones with more justice, less chaos. Which it's so great because it connects for me to how the story came about, because I did start writing it during the early days of the pandemic and was just in this place of feeling like just the relentlessness of life, you know. It just keeps happening and it just keeps coming, and there's hardly a minute to like look back on how we got here, you know. And so I think my story is one of those stories I didn't think too hard about composing and the structure of it. It just kind of came out the way that it was in some ways. With this, most of the stories I write are like in a very narrow time frame, like a morning or you know, one day or one you know, commute on the Metro North or something. But this one takes place over like 10 or 12 years. It has like a wide span of time and it moves really swiftly through it, which was something that was new for me, but it kind of gave me a chance to work out this thing of all the different lives we live within one life, you know. And when you live in one place, or a place like New York City, all of those lives a little bit coexist. And I like the idea of moving swiftly through it in the way that life was just sort of kept happening to us and still does. But when I think about the way that life just keeps happening to me, it sort of feels like it's the same as saying it happens to you, it happens to all of us. And that was sort of how the second person came out in that, which was not something that I've ever really particularly wanted to do, but for this story, it really worked and gave it a, I think, sort of the feel that it does.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Did we get everybody before I do the global thank you? I think it was really wonderful to hear, and this is not shutting off. I really hope people do have questions or something, but I have to say that it really is useful and really enlightening to hear a little bit more about why you chose the type of story that you chose and how you went about it. And Seth, let's keep up more of those suicide notes, because that was just so stinking funny. I mean, suicide note should not be funny, but you know, it was funny. So I really appreciate you all being willing to feel just a little bit vulnerable and telling us a little bit more about why you wrote your stories. So I might just throw out one other thing. Do any of you have any novels that you're planning on writing or that you've got started in your computer right now? I'd love to hear about them. And no, I'm not going to make each of you talk. I promise. I only do that.
Or you can add, similar to Seth's interview, you can talk about something that's coming up. If you have anything that's coming up in the future, some posting. Just shameless plug time. Just you can put it in the chat and I'll link everyone later. Otherwise, we are, I think, about to wrap it up. Otherwise, not to keep people over. All right, we'll keep it a mystery for now. This is all a mystery. You'll stay tuned for the next one. Yep, see, more things in the works, more to come. That's perfect. The perfect way to end things. Thank you so much, everyone, for reading. Thank you to the editors and the judges. Thank you to Fernanda. And thank you to our lovely visitors who joined and heard this. Check back in on all these people, all these folks. You can find them online. You can look at what they're doing in the future. And I hope to see y'all very soon. Thank you for coming. Bye.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kira. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone.